It is. All right, cool. So as I was saying, we don't obviously only have ES5 and ES6, but they're the ones that keep getting thrown around as the, oh, is it ES5 or is it ES6 syntax? And we are gonna, as a sort of binning them into binary format, it's often that we say anything that wasn't existing in ES5, we just call it ES6. It's not technically correct, but people are going to understand what you're talking about. But as a vague overview, we've got ES5, which was brought around in 2009, and then there was a big gap of nothing. So prior to that, it was getting updated relatively frequently, and then there was nothing for 6 years, which is a long time. And then advancements started being made, and JavaScript really needed to kind of catch up and make itself relevant again to keep being used. And that's when ES6 came along in 2015. So of the things that we know and love of ES6, let's see what came. Now, this isn't an exhaustive list at all. I do recommend, if you would like an exhaustive list of what came along, I'll pop this link in chat, and I'll also actually pop it in the Slack channel. So if anyone's here who I didn't add in that Brunch and Learn Slack channel, I'll be adding a few links and then the recording in a couple hours later as well. Thank you for Meg for suggesting that. And so yeah, we've got our ES6 features. So things like our class syntax and that extends keyword, that's something that came along with ES6, and we'll definitely look at using class syntax today. Import and export. So this is actually the first thing we're going to cover, mostly because I'm using it in this code base. So I don't want you to look at it and be like, what is that? So we'll cover that first. And we've got, so our string, our template literals, that feels like it's something that we just assume's been around forever, but it hasn't. Our arrow functions, we're just definitely going to have a look at those today. Let and const, so our two new variable declaration words that we got with ES6. I'm not going to spend actually any time on them today, because last week I did a scope and hoisting class and we went quite deep into the difference between var, let, and const. The recording for that is in the JavaScript channel. And we also got array destructuring. Array destructuring, not object destructuring. Object destructuring is very new, oddly enough, but we'll have a look at both of them today. And then, okay, so what came ES7? We got that dot includes. Like, I use dot includes all the time, and that only came about in 2016. This exponential operator. 2017, we got objects.entries and .values. We'll definitely have a look at both of those today, I think. And also async await, which we're not going to look at today, but that came along in ES8. And then ES9, finally, we get object destructuring. Awesome. If anyone's in React at the moment, I almost guarantee that you've used object destructuring, either consciously or subconsciously, unconsciously. And then this year just gone, we finally got array.flat, this catch binding. So that's when you catch an error, it'll automatically pass along that error to the next block, which is pretty cool. And yeah, so that's a very extremely incomplete overview of the history of JavaScript features being added, just to make it clear that it's not just binary, ES6 and old. It's a bit more granular than that, but it's okay not to know exactly what year each feature came out. It's just interesting to know, I think. So, as I said, I want to start with these module imports and exports because I am using it in this code base, because I've got some code in other files I want to bring into my main file. I am using Webpack and Babel here to bring everything together, so I can use these nice modules. And let's have a look at this in ES5. So I've got this file called ES5 export. So let's bring it up, close iteration. And I've also got ES6 export. It needs me to make a silly change. And there we go. Just don't know why it makes sense to have them in that order. So I have got here, I wish to use some of this code that's in this ES5 exports file. I've made a var of bar, so it's a variable. It's pointing to this object. That object has got two key value pairs, translate, which points to a function. Remember, functions first-class citizens in JavaScript, which means we can use them as any other piece of data. If I want to store that in the variable, I can. Awesome. And then I've also got some instructions. So this is essentially it will take your sentence and translate it into sheep, which is obviously very useful. We need this in the world. So I've exported it so I can use it elsewhere. And in my main.js, I am importing it like this. Or I guess it's a bit of a misnomer to say importing. It'll be a bit confusing if I say importing, because we are going to literally import it, but using the keyword import when we switch to ES6. But in our ES5, I've got to use this require. So it's its own entity, and we want to use it to bring in our exports. And as you can see, I've just set the result of it to the ES5 translator. What it's requiring is, it says it's requiring that whole file, but to see exactly what it's actually bringing in, we need to look at this exports. So it's just giving out this single var, and it's storing it in ES5 translator. So if I want to use that, let's see, in fact, I can do ES5 translator dot instructions. Let's try that, because that is now pointing actually directly to this object. Bar is the export, so this is its focus. Let's console log these. And let's refresh. Cool, and it's printed out my instructions. Tells me to pass a string to translate, to see it in sheepish. So sure, let's try that. So the object is stored in here. Let's call translate on it, and let's go JS fundamentals are awesome. Oh, right. So that produces, what does this produce me? It returns the actual phrase, it doesn't log it for me. So let's go result. Result equals this, and then let's console log the result. Oh, beautiful, I've got a sheep translator. Okay, awesome. So this is to export our singular item from our ES5. Let's now have a look at how we do that in ES6. And I will say before we even go any further, you can mix and match these. Obviously that could be a little bit confusing, but sometimes you're working in environments where you either need to or for some reason you want to. You'll find different documentation for different things written in various, so if you are using documentation to inspire your work, you might find like, oh, I got to use require for this one instead of import. Well, maybe not. Usually it's just depending on what your environment, not theirs. Yeah.
There's a question in the chat.
Awesome.
Tony asked if the JS features make their way to derivatives like TypeScript.
That's a great question. I don't know the answer. I'm actually not familiar with TypeScript hardly at all. Certainly not from a using it regularly enough to understand it.
I think, well, I like dabbled in TypeScript, and I think like they have their, I know TypeScript has its own documentation, like it's like a compiler of JavaScript. So I think it's like it's meant to like cut down on the actual lines of code that JavaScript takes to do things. So I would think it's different.
Yeah, I don't know the exact answer to that. I apologize, but I'm sure we can find out. Can we also review inner functions in JavaScript? We're going to do a high-level overview of functions and keep an eye out for next week is probably a good one for that question because it's going to be all about closures and binding, which again we'll cover very briefly today, but only on a high level. Cool. Okay. So I've actually got here our Zoom. Don't be like that. Does anyone know how I stop Zoom from thinking I care about it? There we go. That was horrible. All right. So
you can there's like a drop down where you can hide the controls.
It's the screen portion thing. It's not the no, it's not the bar issue.
Very nice.
Portion. Okay, fine. Oh my goodness. Okay, seems like potluck, really. I'm sure it's not potluck. Okay, so there's our one coming in. Okay, now let's have a look at our ES6 file. So this is pretty much exactly the same, apart from it translates it into meow instead of bar. And I've saved this in a const just because I can. But otherwise it points the same to an object which has two keys, translate and instructions. Translate points us to a function. I've used an arrow function here. We'll go deeper into those a bit later. And instructions exactly the same. And I've used this export statement. So because I'm only exporting one item here, I can just say, just the default thing for you to get rid of here, to export here is this cat translator. So one thing defined, one thing out. So that means I can now bring it in like this. So this is the big difference, ES5, ES6 in terms of importing. For ES5, we need to use this require. For ES6, we can use import from. So you can get a little bit more flexible with your imports, with these import statements, which we'll see in a second. But as a high level overview, visually, that's the difference that we're here for. Okay, so let's see what happens when we have more than one. So let's go back to ES5. So now I wish to export bar and moo. So bar is exactly the same, moo is the same, but it says moo. And all I've done really is instead of this single module export is bar, I've actually sent it out an object. So this object is got, again, key value pairs, and I've decided to rename bar as sheep translator, makes sense, and moo as cow translator. So wherever I export it to, I'm going to have access to this bar object via whatever I store this as, .sheep translator, and then the cow as cow translator. So let's have a look at that. So I'm going to, actually, we just got to put this back in really, because we still need to say, okay, well, you know, this is what I'm going to call it. But now I can access each of those things individually. So before this was pointing directly to that bar object, and now it's pointing to the export object, which has two keys. One of them points to the sheep translator, one to the cow translator. So if I wanted to use, hello. Sorry if that was a loud microphone blip there. Here we go. So we can now use it as ES5 translator, because that's what I brought it in as, .cow translator. So that's taking me as far as that object. Within it, I can use translate. here I've done a translation, obviously, and logging it out, but it's just, it's exactly the same, really, and it's just that I gave myself another object to have to get through to have these multiples. So you may see this around. You probably won't have to use it too often. More likely is you'll be using these import and exports, although do get to know your requires as well, because in some environments you won't have access to ES6 necessarily, or you won't have access to Babel to transpile it down. So let's see if we want to spit out 2 items. So here I've chosen, instead of my default export, which I had for cat translator when I just wanted to get 1 out, I've just I've let it know, okay, both of these items are going to be exported. Maybe I've got something private in here, so const private equal. So maybe I don't want to have access to that outside of this module or this file. So I just want to export these guys. And so I can use my import syntax, which is gonna look like, well, we can, there's a couple of ways we can do it. We can do it like this, so it might start to look familiar. So these are our named exports. I named it as cat translator and dog translator. They've maintained those names because I didn't rename them anything in particular, and I can import them separately. So I could do the same thing as with the other one and do something like translators and then access, you know, translators cat translator, but I think this is great to be able to do that. I think that's really awesome. And then if you're like, well, that's great, but I really don't want to, I can't be bothered to call it that, that's fine, we can rename them. So I'm going to say, okay, I need that cat translator from that file, but for the purposes of this file, could you please call it meow, because I'm too lazy to type cat translator, which is really nice. I've done both of them here, but you don't have to do both. So say, maybe I don't mind writing dog translator because it's exactly the same length. But I can do that. So that's super, super nice. I personally think all this import, export, require business is something that you just get better at the more you do it, and you don't necessarily think about it. But there we go. If you ever need a reference point, you can come back here and like, oh yes, that's where we are.
Beth, so yeah. In the ES6 exports file,
yes.
Is there a way you can bundle those two together so you just import them as one thing?
Yeah, so you could bring in the entire module and well, quite similar to the require, if you wanted to. If you didn't want the named exports, and then just do like the doc cat translator.
Because I'm just thinking, if you had like a ton of things, like you wouldn't want to have like this huge list.
Mm-hmm. So you can import all. I think you can use the wildcard as well.
Oh, okay.
Like yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That takes care of that.
Wildcard's pretty universal in its functioning, so it's pretty awesome. It wasn't. Do you remember in the last Branch and Learn, and we had the redirects, and we're like, okay, anything to here, but then to reference it in the actual destination, we could just do splat. I thought that was wicked. That's really cool. Splat. All right, awesome. Oh my goodness, this is, I've done it, I'm doing it again. I need to really like keep a track on how much we can do in 1 hour, because it's not so much. Okay, cool. So let's move swiftly on to the next thing. So imports and exports we got with ES6. Let's have a look at object destructuring and array destructuring, because they're really cool. and not completely necessary, but this is something I use a lot, and I do think that it tidies things up, makes it easier to read. So as we saw array destructuring, we did get with ES6, but object destructuring, we had to wait until ES9, 2018. So that's still very fresh and exciting, relatively speaking. Here's another import statement. Let's just go and see what that stuff is. So it's from destructuring. And in here I have got, let's bring it. In here I have got, I've got an object of Studio Setup, which I'm not exporting, but I am exporting a function called print my stuff, which references that Studio Setup. So actually all we need to be able to see in main is that I am calling print my stuff, but otherwise we can kind of get rid of that and just look in here. So what do we mean by destructuring? So it's being lazy, essentially. There's definitely other benefits to it, but being lazy is definitely my favorite. So let's see, what is happening? Can anyone tell me what's happening on line 17?
Acting each of the keys of Studio Setup and storing them in their own variable of the same name.
Exactly. So I'm making 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 variables extremely quickly with very, very minimal effort, which is really nice. You know, if I desperately wanted if I really, really wanted to, I could do const speakers equals Studio Setup dot speakers. I'm literally bored already, right? So and imagine doing that for like all 5 of those. So it's a very nice little way to do that. And then these guys, they were actually came from a nested object here of interface. So I was able to say, hey, can you go into here and grab these things out and also give me 3 more variables on this top level. So they're not actually related now to that bigger object. I just have access to all of them. So let's see if that's, yeah.
A quick question. I'm really new to JavaScript. I'm just waiting for my review. So, sure. But does it matter the order that you're putting speakers, laptop, OS controller, and DAW? Or is it actually calling them like keys? Like if you put X, Y, Z, whatever.
It's the keys. So objects, we cannot guarantee the order of an object. It's kind of like a Ruby hash, right. It's not indexed.
Got it. So all the things on line 17, the order doesn't matter as long as you're
correct.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Thank you.
I was just super lazy and copied the whole thing and then got rid of the lines. So, you know. Awesome. So that seems to have worked fine. So this is running from print my stuff on line 47 here, which is running this function that I imported in. And yeah, there we go. Everything's right there, and I was able to reference them just like this, which is super, super nice. Like I think that's great. Rather than, so there's a few ways I could have done it, right? I could have given each variable its own line, const speakers equals studio setup dot speakers, laptop equals studio blah 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 blah. Or I could have not bothered to put them into variables. I could have just like inline here, but I use a studio setup dot laptop running studio setup dot OS, etc. So it's not, you know, it's definitely not a necessary thing, but it's really handy. Great. So that's the object destructuring, came very recently. Other places we might see it is we can pass things in. So let's say this actually needed to receive Studio Setup as an argument. We could, if we wanted to, bring these guys in here. Laptop, I always do that. So if instead of instead of just referencing it directly. Maybe it's not in scope here. Maybe Studio Setup is not actually available. And I could print my stuff, pass in Studio Setup. Ooh. And then because this is an object, I can straight away here already start destructuring these variables out of it, which is super cool. You'll see that a lot in React in the curriculum. I think that's the first time that a lot of us start really using it heavily. Cool, so that's the object destructuring, which is key to key. The array destructuring, so this came, as we saw, genuinely in ES6, whereas object did not. So I've got this array of scores here, which I am, let's put him up here. I've imported in. And what we can do here is similar, but of course arrays are indexed, so we have to bear that in mind. So if I wanted to take, well, let's not sort them first, but let's go, let's have const, and similar to that array destructuring, I'm saying as the object, I'm saying this is an array, and I wish to have 3 variables, maybe first, second, third, equals ratings, and then let's console log first, second, third. Let's see what that gives us. Don't need to print my stuff anymore. And given us the first 3 from ratings array. So that's pretty cool. You know, could have done it another way. So let's see if we can get the 3rd and 5th. So obviously this now starts to not make sense because now I'm just getting still 6953, even though that's not what I asked for. Does anyone know how in an array?
Can you put empty, an empty space and then a comma?
Yeah, absolutely. So the first, I do want to be the first item in the array. Second, I'm not interested in it. Third, I am. I'll grab that. 5th, 4th, I'm not. 5th, I am. So let's try that. Got 69, 83, 66. Awesome. So we can see that it's skipped those. And say I wanted to skip another one. So 66 should hopefully now be 32. It is beautiful. So that's kind of nice. And then what I've got here is I'm first sorting them. So this is taking that rating, saying I want to sort them into order of, you know, accomplishment. And I've just taken out the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. So I'm not interested in the people who didn't come in the top 3. So I'm just making my winner's statement. The best score was 1st, followed by 2nd and 3rd. So based on this array, 1st looks like it's I can't remember if okay, so we're going for highest score. So 92, 83, 69. Awesome, yes. And then it's just ignore the others. We don't need them. It's fine. So that's a kind of a handy thing to take from that. I like doing that. And then, of course, you know, if we did want maybe people who came in odd numbers, so we can, I don't know, maybe that's what we want. 1st, 3rd, and 5th, and 92, followed by 69 and 55, which is pretty nice. Actually, 1st, 3rd is holding references. 3rd is holding references, also index and holding. I don't. Could you reword what you put on there? I'm not. Actually, 1st, 3rd. Okay, 1st, 3rd is holding references, also index, and holding space for arrays element. Can we say that? I don't quite understand this second half of your sentence. If you could reword it, that would be awesome. And I will attempt to answer that. Cool. All right. So, anything you guys want to try with this object or array destructuring to just give it a go? questions about it? Trying to translate that question. All right.
Hello, Beth. Do you hear me?
Hi. Yes, I can
Hi,
hear you.
how are you? Sorry about the texting. So I mean, like, if we can write also another word for like third or first in the array. So it's gonna be also, if you're gonna also call this word inside of the console log, we're gonna get the same result. So that's mean the word or variables holding the space for the element in the array.
So are you saying, can I change these?
Yeah,
I can.
yeah.
So like best, okay, awful. And so all it's doing is creating me variables.
Yeah.
That's it. It's exactly the same as doing a const best equals 92 or something like that.
Okay, so it's basically just holding the space for the element of the arrays. Whatever we assign the variable in the inside of the const.
It's exactly the same as doing, so let's do sorted equals, and then just let's store that in there. And then const best equals sorted 0. It's the same as doing that.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanna,
no problem.
double check with them.
Yeah, no worries. I mean, you can see how that's a little old, right? If I can do it all in one line, that's awesome. Beautiful. Yeah. So please do use it. But it's also totally fine if you don't use it. It's sugar. It doesn't change the functionality at all. It just can make our life a little bit quicker and easier to navigate. But it's definitely not a requirement. Okay, cool. We're on a fast train, guys. I'm here for it. So let's okay, I'm not going to spend too long on object orientation in JavaScript because there are other study groups on it that really dig into it. So I don't want to spend a load of time on it today, but just for us to visually see side by side this newer class syntax that we've got, then I think that would be great. So let's have a look at this guy. And this guy. Okay. So we have here visually, it's going to sound really, really obvious, but this is visually what the differences are. The module exports obviously different. But we've got here our constructor function, and it is taking in these two attributes that I'll pass it, and it's doling out those attributes as appropriate. And then to add methods to this cat, we can say, okay, on the prototype of cat, I want to give it an item of say your name, and I'm setting it equal to this function. So obviously on this level, that's fine, actually, isn't it? It's not too bad at all. But this class syntax that we've got here is pretty nice to look at, especially if your first brush with object orientation, for example, in Ruby or most other languages actually, which are using this class style inheritance. The important thing to remember, and apologize that we don't have time to really dig into it today, but do look out for other study groups and read the material on this. The fact that we have this class syntax does not change how object orientation works in JavaScript. It's still what we'd call prototypal. So just because it looks like class syntax is not actually class inheritance. We're not going to dig into it today because I really would love to get onto the other things, but do have a look out for the object orientation study groups where you can really dig into that, because it's awesome, and it's just really interesting. Okay, Adam says, is this .name sort of like an ATA accessor? More like assigning instance variables if we're going to associate it back to Ruby. Yeah. Cool. So I mean, let's just see. We've got these coming in. So I'm requiring my my cat. Let's see if we can put the dog up here. Okay, and we've got Zelda here. So because I gave this, I gave cat this method of say your name, all my cats should have access to that now. I'm so sorry, I keep bumping my microphone today. And let's, there we go. Prototype name is Zelda, prototype name is Ziggy. So I used that constructor function to create two references to this cat. And I can do that. Beautiful. And my class syntax, which I think for most people looks a little bit more friendly, a little bit more familiar. We've still got this this idea of the constructor function. That's it's baked inside, visually baked inside this class. And here's that exact same function. Say your name. So again, we can start putting that somewhere a bit more friendly looking. And I've also popped in a static method here. So that's one I can call on the class of dog. So let's see, we've got our dogs coming, got our class coming in. This is another way I can do that default export. That won't work with consts, by the way, but can work here. So I'm importing the class. I'm making Masha, who's a new dog, and Alfie. So let's do Masha.say your name. And there we go. And then let's see, so dog. So this static keyword. We can do dog.roll call. So if anyone's more recent brushes with Ruby, that's kind of like your self.roll call, if you like. It's your class method. There we go. So I can't do, let's see what happens if I try and do masher.roll call. It says masher.roll call is not a function. It doesn't even tell me it's not accessible. It's just like, no idea what you're talking about. Fair enough. Let's see the other way around. If I see if this just says it's not a function, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's not a function. Cool. So please do take a look at other study groups, and it's good to I wouldn't say force yourself to write in the non-class syntax versions of this, but I think it's good to be able to recognize them and still be like, okay, we're creating objects, here's a constructor function, and just have a visual idea of your way around it for if you see it out in the wild. Cool. I'm not going to ask for questions on that because there's always questions on that and I want to. So she says, so the benefit is just less verbosity. Well, I suppose you might even say there's more in that class that I've got here. It's the benefit for me is that I feel like it's much more obvious what I'm looking at. We can go a little deeper into that, but I would like to leave that for another day if that's okay. Also, there's a lot of documentation and references to this online, and I think in the curriculum as well. I think they still have some of the older syntax in there too. Cool. All right. Let's talk about functions, because we're going to use them in the next bit as well. So, function declarations versus arrow functions. So arrow functions came new to us with ES6, and there are certain differences in them. Anyone got a difference you want to shout out?
Implicit return.
A function expression has implicit returns. So actually this, let's not do it here. So let's say we've got function return me.
I know arrow functions, they're anonymous, right?
They're not, sorry?
They're anonymous functions, so they just are immediately invoked.
Yeah, okay, so we're going to look at 3 different types of function now. So we're going to have this function declaration, return me, return hey declaration.
So what Connie, I think what Connie said, I don't understand why you kind of, because she is correct, like some arrow functions do have an implicit return.
Yes, some do. And there's a very, very distinct way to do it. So this arrow function does not have an implicit return.
Right, it can't have the squirrely brackets.
Exactly.
Bracket.
The squirrely bracket.
The squirrely. We all knew what we meant.
I'm sleepy.
It's okay, Connie.
Cool. So
also the value of this.
Yes, absolutely. So we're warming up to that for sure. So let's make this a bit bigger. We know we're getting serious and we make our editor bigger, right? So we've got our 3 here. So yeah, it's as soon as we add this block, then we lose that implicit return benefit. Really. So that's fine. You might be like, okay, well, let's just use these. Okay, sure. But what if you want to return an object? Now it doesn't know actually if this is a block or an object, so it's not going to return it. It's actually it's going to be very, very angry at you. So if you want to do that, then we would actually need to wrap this in a block and return. So yeah, it's something that said, I keep hearing it said around like arrow functions have implicit returns. Yeah, sometimes, maybe. if you don't have the block, then you do, which is pretty cool. So let's get on to this, because this is where it gets really interesting. Okay, so I've got just pop these both in an object. So I've got this declaration function, and they do exactly the same thing. They both take in a message as an argument, and they log my message is whatever I passed in, and I'm declaring this to be whatever this is. So what would we say is how could we describe what this is? Why do I care what this is?
Well, this gives the context of
Yeah.
like
Great.
what the message is, so that's why we care.
Yeah, and so for anything that we use in here, if we want to refer to this, then we need to know what this is, and that is not always well, there's rules around it, so we'll know. So let's go. Let's pass both of these. Has anyone got an idea of what each of these will return? I'm giving them both a message, that's okay. What about the this for each of these? So in the declaration and the arrow, what's this going to be in each one?
So for the declaration, this is what the function is being called on.
Okay.
And the arrow is the context of the function itself.
Cool. Let's have a look at this. All right, cool. So I've got my message is a declared truth and I'm declaring this to be undefined. My message is the pointed truth and I am pointing to undefined. So what we've got here is actually a terrible example because I made a much nicer example of this, but that's okay. That's okay. We can play around with. What happened to my awesome example that I made? I made a really cool example. It was with the dogs. Okay, but that's all right. For time purposes, we can stay here. So yeah, so what I wanted to do is to call this on something really, but how can I define what this is? So we're getting a little bit into next week's now, but say, okay, well, this is undefined. So what I want to make it something. How can I change it in the declaration?
Wait, can you repeat that?
Yeah, so in the function declaration, I can manually adjust what this is by changing how I call it. Do I know how I can do that?
Should you explicitly say what type it is, what data type it is?
I don't think that would help.
Well, I mean, is it message dot this? Is it declaration dot? What is it?
Yeah, exactly. So it's as Meg said, this is a context that we're working in at a time. So I can actually I can give it a context to work in. What I can do is a couple. Oh, sorry, Meg.
You can use like it's not bind, call or apply, right?
Yeah, I can even bind actually, because I am at this point, I'm directly, I could bind at this point. So I'm saying, what is this set? Now I could be like bind, and let's stick Alfie in there. Alfie's that dog that I made up there. So there we go. And okay, and let's run that. There he is. I'm declaring this to be Alfie. So that's cool. Once it's bound, I can't really change it. But if it's not bound, those two methods that Meg mentioned we could use. So we've got .call and .apply. So .call, so they both take at least well, two arguments in this case, because I've got an argument that what is this needs to receive. So the first one is going to be the context that I want it in. So let's do Alfie again. And then the second is going to be any second and so on and so forth is going to be any arguments that needs. So I do need to pass it an actual message. So let's try that. Oh yeah, well, it'd be better if I, hey there, Alfie. Oh. There we go. My message is, hey there, Alfie, and I'm declaring this to be and then we get Alfie, which is nice. The difference with apply, does anyone know the difference between call and apply?
Apply, you pass in, like you would pass, hey there, Alfie, as an array.
Yeah, exactly. That's it. So apply only takes all the arguments as its second argument, and it takes them in an array. So if I had more, I would just add them on. Whereas with call, there would just be additional arguments on there. So that's worked fine. Okay, so let's try and bind this arrow function to Marsha. Oh, that would be good if I called it. And it remains undefined. So we can't actually change the context of our arrow function. It's always, as Meg said, the context of itself. So that's going to, I'm going to make a much better demonstration of that for next time. So I had an excellent one going. I don't know why I deleted it. That was silly. So yeah, we unfortunately cannot change that. That could be a positive, it could be a negative, especially when we start thinking about our in our classes. We may actually have a mix of arrow functions and function declarations. If you're ever having an issue with your this in your function, try it the other way around, and then like, okay, I see I didn't have access to this actually at that time.
Do you feel the arrow function gives you more control and more predictability?
Oh, I guess predictability is a good one, yes. If you're not sure, you can always be kind of sure about the arrow function. I guess there's not really a benefit or a downside to either of them. You just need to use the one that's appropriate for you at that time. So this is it's definitely not that arrow functions came and kicked function declarations out of the scene, for sure. It's just that we already had function declarations and now we have this additional option. It definitely doesn't make the declarations obsolete. Before we finish, I do want to show you though that we can do, let me put that back in. We can use call and apply on what is this arrow, slightly, well, no, not useless actually, because, you know, depends on your context. But with, it doesn't, we can't change its context, but we can give it its message. I'm calling. Let's see what happens there. Oh. My messages, I'm calling. So it doesn't matter what I can't, it's locked down. That binding to this is locked down. So we can't change it. But we can still use call and apply. Could be useful if you've got think of a useful situation, Beth. If for some reason you need to pass your arguments in a separate way, maybe you can do that. But you still have that option with the arrow functions. It's just that
so if you just left a space instead of Alfie, would it work?
No.
Nope.
No, can I give it null maybe? Let's see. There we go. If you ever don't need an argument, just null is fine. If we get rid of this, it's going to have, if we get rid of this, it's undefined because it thought I'm calling was the first argument, that context, which it's politely ignoring. And JavaScript, if anyone's not noticed yet, doesn't care if you don't bother passing an argument. It'll just be like, oh yeah, you don't need it, I guess. Pros and cons. Pros and cons. You know how so everyone's been through Ruby now, and if it gives argument errors everywhere because you pass in too few or too many arguments. You don't get those in JavaScript. It'll just carry on and just be like, it's undefined if you didn't give it a value. Yeah, pros and cons. Okay, guys, so we have hit time and we were just about to start iteration. So what I'm going to do is I'll add a session probably next week or this week as a rough. Any ideas on what you guys would prefer to do iteration?
Anytime's good for me. All
right, cool. So, well, keep an eye out for it. I'll probably make it next week so people have more time to think about their schedules and stuff. And yeah, you have nowhere to go. Fair enough. All right, guys. Nowhere to do, not necessarily anywhere to go, but you do have things to do. So that's I need to be aware of that. Cool. All right, guys. I will pop this recording in the JavaScript channel. Sorry, not the Brunch and Learn. And I will hopefully see you guys next week at least once, and either again this week or next week a second time too.
Thank you, Beth.
Bye.